Hello and a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. The top stories from the region this week. Literally starving, the distribution of vital food aid stops as fighting once again breaks out in the Yarmouk district south of Damascus, leaving thousands queuing in the shadow of bombed-out buildings with nothing at all to eat. Insisting that prayer is a full-time job, hundreds of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews take to the streets of Jerusalem, protesting against a law that could see them forced to fight. And finally, a movie all about one Israeli soldier made by the men who held him captive for 5 years. Fleeting illusion promises to reveal the capture and detention of Gilad Shalit, at least from Hamas's perspective. Heartbreaking and hard to believe scenes from Syria this week. Tens of thousands of men, women and children queuing for food aid in the Palestinian-dominated district of Yarmouk in southern Damascus. Since January, there had been a truce to allow vital resources in, but this collapsed somewhat Sunday as fighting once again ricocheted across the neighbourhood. Both sides blame the other for the violence. As you will see, the district had already been bombed to bits, and now locals are literally dying of hunger. Yuka Royer has the story.
This is a population on the brink of starvation. Stretching as far as the eye can see, men, women and children of Yarmouk line up to get food parcels. Looking distraught, this little boy couldn't get the handout because he wasn't strong enough to carry it.
My dad's dead, my mum's injured and can't move. We don't have anything. Please tell them to give us something.
Yarmouk, a Palestinian refugee camp outside Damascus, is one of many communities under siege. A recent truce between government and rebel forces has allowed aid to trickle into the area, which had been cut off from the outside world since July. But the UN has only been able to carry out limited food aid distribution as fighting continues around the area. Officials say the neighbourhood must be completely demilitarized.
I saw some people really with signs of illness. They haven't seen a doctor or a nurse for months on end. And I think this is urgent. To do this, we need more access. We need to go inside the camp. We need to reach the people ourselves rather than the people reaching out to us.
A short distance away, these children are taking shelter in a local school. They speak of the dire conditions inside the Yarmouk camp.
The situation in the refugee camp was horrible. There was no food, no water. We could barely live. We couldn't find even a spoon of food. Sometimes we ate grass, we were so hungry.
Rising food shortages are affecting civilians throughout the country. Even the most basic foodstuff like bread is hard to come by. These bakers in Damascus are recycling stale bread.
These days we grind wheat, fodder, barley and old hard bread. We have nothing else to bake. People are baking whatever they can get their hands on to feed their children.
Nearly 3 years since the start of the conflict, more than 9 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance, 6 million of them critically, according to the United Nations. Some 250,000 people trapped in areas under siege are most at risk. President Assad's regime has been accused of using starvation as a war tactic. The rising infighting among rival rebels is making it even more difficult for aid workers to access the populations in need.
Well, Yarmouk is only one of a number of besieged neighbourhoods across Syria. An estimated 250,000 people are out of reach of aid deliveries, according to organisation officials. Many of those who can flee. The UN says almost 40% of the Syrian population has been displaced or seek shelter abroad. Over 20,000 refugees have crossed into Turkey in the last 2 months alone. Well, all reporters there met up with Syrian journalists who left Syrian national TV to go and work for an opposition radio.
6 months ago, Zoya Bostan gave up her life in Syria, but not her work as a journalist. Once a presenter on Syrian national television, Zoya has been part of the launch of Hawa Smart, an opposition radio station transmitting in Syria, like many others created since the start of the revolution. Their improvised studio is in an apartment in the south of Turkey. The main difference is that the majority of the journalists are women.
This reflects the true image of women in Syrian society, mainly that we still exist. This is in contrast to the current global tendency to say, you see, the Syrians are killing each other and women are taking the back seat.
In a country in the grip of war, radio frequencies are simply shared as tags on city walls. Information is spread by correspondents on the ground who are no longer afraid of showing their faces, challenging both the censorship of the regime and close-minded jihadists. Among the issues they cover is the plight of Syrian women, who are the mothers and wives of missing persons and also increasingly victims of rape, a new weapon in the conflict in Syria.
There's a very scary number of rape cases today in Syria, and almost every day we receive videos of testimonies.
There is also the issue of food, a vital need for those living under siege. To help provide her listeners with provisions, every morning Linda reads a list of the products that have been sent out.
We do that because there's a lot of places under siege. There are no goods, no food, none of the basic needs. We're trying to send a message to the people who want to send something and tell the ones who need aid where they can find it.
Ali Safar is one of the founders of Radio Hawa Smart. His decision to put it in the hands of women came from the belief that Syria cannot be a true democracy unless the role of women improves.
Women who are working in our radio now are journalists and used to work in media generally. And somehow we need to hear the voices of women in alternative media. We need this voice to reach people because in the past the voice of women in the regime media was just an accessory.
As the conflict in Syria enters its fourth year, opponents of the regime of Bashar al-Assad are now worried about the effect of jihadists, whom they consider a new obstacle in their fight for democracy.
Insisting that praying is a full-time job, ultra-Orthodox Jews have taken to the streets of Jerusalem, protesting a proposed law that would see members of the community drafted into the army for the first time. Military service is already compulsory for most Jewish men. As a tiny group when Israel was founded, the ultra-Orthodox were given an exemption. But with their numbers growing, they may now have to sign up. Elena Casas reports.
Jerusalem brought to a standstill. Traffic blocked and streets paralysed by hundreds of thousands of its most Orthodox citizens. They're protesting against a change in the law that would end their exemption from military service. The ultra-Orthodox argue studying the Torah is a full-time occupation that benefits the whole community.
One of the important elements of the Jewish religion is the study of its Torah, which is the most important part of it. And they are imposing upon us a draft law which will not enable us to do so any further. That is the most important reason why we're out here today.
The exemption was created when Israel was founded in 1948. Then it only applied to 400 yeshiva students. Now the ultra-Orthodox make up 10% of Israel's population, or 800,000 people. Haredi men don't work either, many living on welfare stipends while focusing on prayer and study. Many secular Israelis feel they aren't making a fair contribution. Boaz Noel created a petition in 2012 calling for universal military service. He collected over 500,000 signatures.
First of all, it is important that there is one law for everybody. It doesn't make sense that me and my son, we will have to go and serve the country and nobody will ask us whether we're interested or not. It is duty. And someone else, because he's wearing black, he will get released for any duty.
For the first time in a decade, there are no Haredi ministers in the cabinet, and the centre-right government is pushing for change. Some Orthodox say that's because secular Jews are worried by their population growth.
I think the establishment feels threatened, and rightly so. They're worried that in 10 to 20 years, Israel will be a different place. The Orthodox will be in charge.
Parliament is expected to vote on a bill that would end the exemption before the end of the month.
Well, back in 2006, one young Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, made the international headlines after he was captured by the Palestinian militant group Hamas. Shalit was held for 5 full years. He was finally released in exchange for 1,027 Palestinian prisoners. The first insight into his capture and detention could be about to hit the screens as a film financed by his captors is produced. Here's a sneak preview of Fleeting Illusion.
It was a scene that brought tears to many Israelis. Gilad Shalit, a foot soldier who'd become everyone's son, arriving back home after 5 years in Hamas captivity. Now, 3.5 years after his release, his former captors are making a film about the soldier's story.
I wrote the scenario based on reports and documentaries about the Israeli army. People from the resistance also gave us some information.
Director Majed Jundier says he's not a member of Hamas, but the film Fleeting Illusion, produced by the Gaza government's culture ministry, has the militants as the heroes. For Hamas, the film will showcase a victory for the Palestinian cause. The Israeli soldier was freed in exchange for more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. An ambitious project, but the film will be a low-budget affair. This in part because an Israeli blockade on Gaza, prompted by Shalit's kidnapping, has crippled the Strip's economy. Also, Iran withdrew promised funds after its relations with Hamas got strained by their differences over the Syrian conflict.
Unfortunately, we're not talking about large numbers. We were hoping that there would be funds to support this film. We're talking now about $320,000, which is the minimum cost to produce the film.
With the budget cut down to a fraction of the initial $2.5 million, most of the 40-strong cast are working for free. Nonetheless, some Gaza residents are eagerly waiting for the film's release.
I hope that I can see the film and how the resistance controlled him.
The two-part movie promises to contain revelations about Shalit's capture and the location and conditions of his imprisonment. With cinemas in the coastal territory mostly destroyed, the film will be screened at only a few places before being broadcast on local TV.
Well, that's it for this week's show. Don't forget you can catch it all again on our website, france24.com, and feel free to leave us your comments and questions too. Until next time, take care.